As a bit of a backstory, I was working for a small chain motel in the Midwest as a night auditor, so my hours were normally 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. With those kind of hours, and being a woman, I'm bound to have some weird stories. The scariest time I'd ever been working there happened within my first month. So, it was a little before my shift started, and because I was single and 22, I was on Tinder before work. I matched with this guy who seems cool, a little goth, alternative, and into Ouija boards and tarot, which is my type, so I was hype at the time. We talk for a bit, and I tell him I have to go to work. We say goodbye. Now, that night was my first night off training, so I was running the motel by myself for 9 hours. I was already a little nervous, but then this vaguely familiar guy comes up to the front desk and asks for me by my name. In my head, I've got red flags blaring at me, because this dude is weird. Not by looks, but just by vibe. I tell him that I'm me, and he explains that he was the guy from Tinder, and he saw that I was less than a mile away. So, he went to see if I was possibly working at his hotel. That's right. This guy was staying where I worked. Red flag number 2. I stayed behind the comfort of my desk for 2 hours, because this guy won't stop talking to me. Mostly about how his ex left him and how he beat people up, and how he wanted to bang me. Needless to say, I was uncomfortable, and this hadn't happened to me before in a work environment, so I didn't know what to do. He finally decided to go to bed. It was around 2 to 3 a.m., and I take a much needed smoke break. I go outside, and right after I spark up, guess who shows up? Creepy dude. I snooped a bit on his account, and he was a painter and doing work locally, so he wasn't from here. He tells me about where he's from, and keeps getting closer and closer to me. He asks if he can smoke weed, which I said yes to so he'd get away from me. I showed him where the cameras weren't, and he pulled me in, smelled my neck, and started grabbing my butt. I swiftly hit him, and told him he better not mess around with me. I threw my cigarette on the ground, and grabbed my phone to call my boss before going inside. That creepy dude rips the phone from my hand and proceeds to text himself. Now he had my number. The first thing he sends to me is a picture of his, well, unmentionable part. I've seen some of them in my day, but that was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was horrible. Then came the creepy adult-only GIFs, with captions like, "I can't wait to do this with you. You know what room I'm in." Now I'm already freaking out. And I don't know why I didn't call the cops, but my boss wasn't answering. So there's me in the back office having the panic attack of my life. When I get one more video, why I click on it I'll never know. I refuse to say what I saw in detail, but on it was another adult film, very violent and very sexual. I then locked myself in the back room, cried, and waited for a few hours before proceeding to make hotel breakfast. The text went on for a few days until I had enough, and I got the balls to tell my boss. He immediately kicked out the creepy dude, and banned him from our hotel. His company is not even allowed to book with that hotel anymore. In hindsight, I should have called the police, but I was too scared. Creepy dude? I hope we never meet again. When I was young, I wanted to become a psychiatrist. My college years, however, proved that I had a greater aptitude for smoking weed and playing video games rather than reading medical textbooks. And when I went up for medical school, I couldn't get in. I stayed in college for a few more years, racking up debt and adding another major to my degree so I wouldn't have to go to grad school. Eventually, I ended up as a social worker. I did that job for 7 years before I became a teacher, and I've got quite a few stories from that time in my life. Some strange and some sad. This one is both. I reconstructed an interview with Daniel, a 7-year-old boy who shot his father to death after the father murdered Daniel's mother. This case has stuck with me for many years, and I'd like to share it with you now.
It's nice to see you again, Daniel. Do you know why I'm here? I want to talk to you about what happened to your father. Do you remember the story you told detectives? Yes, sir. I can hear the rustling on the audio tape as I reach in my pocket for candy, handing it to Daniel. Thank you, sir. You're welcome, Daniel. You're a very polite young man. Daniel looks up for a moment before looking at the floor again. Do you think I'm good, sir? Yes, Daniel. I think you're good. I don't think I'm good. Why's that? If I was good, then Dad wouldn't have hit me. I don't think he hit you because you're bad, Daniel. Maybe you're right. He hit my mom too, and she wasn't bad. Can you tell me what happened that night, Daniel? My dad came home from the bar. He was yelling. How do you know he came home from the bar? He smelled. I can hear scribbling as I make a note in my pad. And then what happened? It's okay, Daniel. Just take a deep breath. This is the last time you have to talk about it. He started hitting my mom. And then he stopped. My mom was crying. So I gave her Josel. Who was Josel? He's my teddy bear. He always makes me feel better when I'm crying. I thought he would make my feel mom better too. Did he make her feel better? I think so. She smiled, but it was the sad kind of smile. What happened then, Daniel? There's a long pause as Daniel stares at the ground. He doesn't want to say it, and I don't blame him. It's okay, Daniel. It's the last time. I promise. He got his gun, and then he shot my mom. And after that, you ran to your room? No. No? I mean, yes, but first I had to grab Josel. You had to grab your teddy bear? Yes. I didn't want to leave him alone with my dad. He'd be scared. I see. And then, I ran into my room and locked the door. My dad tried to get in. He hit the door really hard. It was really loud, and Josel was really scared. How did he get in? He broke the door. It was really loud. And then, he pointed the gun at me. And I asked him not to shoot Josel, but I don't think he heard me. Why is that? Because he pulled the trigger anyway. But he didn't shoot you. No, the gun didn't work. He threw it at the floor. Then what? He tried to get me, but he fell. He smashed his nose. What happened to the gun, Daniel? It started floating. Are you sure? Yes. What happened then? I heard my mom whisper in my ear. She told me to close my eyes. And did you? Yes. And? The gun went off. Did you see what happened to your dad? No. I kept my eyes closed. Did anything else happen? No. The police came and put a blanket on me, and they took me somewhere. I don't really remember that part. You're sure that's what happened? Yes. Thank you for your time, Daniel. I promise. That's the last time you'll have to tell this story. Thank you. I don't really like this story that much. I need to go make my report now. I'm gonna leave you here with your aunt and uncle, okay? Okay. There's a sound of a chair being pushed back as I go to stand up. Mr. Robbins? Yes, Daniel? I think about it a lot, right before I go to sleep. Well, we can arrange for a counselor to talk. It's okay. When I can't sleep, my mom whispers in my ear for me to close my eyes, and I always fall asleep right after. That's good, Daniel. Tell her I said hi. I will.
The recording shuts off there. We did arrange for a counselor for Daniel, of course. As far as I know, he never changed his testimony. There was never any real question of who shot Daniel's dad. The statements of the neighbors who heard the conflict very clearly indicated a series of shots followed by silence from the mother, a series of loud bangs as the father broke down the door, and finally 3 more shots which corresponded to the death of the father. No one else was in the house, and ballistics showed that the shots were fired from 6 feet away. Daniel was the only choice, and officially, he's the one who shot his father. Yet, I stayed up for a long time that night, wondering if Daniel had it right. I didn't really believe that his mother had come back as a ghost to save him, but in Daniel's version of reality, his mother wasn't just a battered woman who died a pointless and violent death. She was a hero, who defied death to save her son. In Daniel's version, he wasn't scared. He was protecting his teddy bear, Josel. I think he deserved to remember the story that way. That night, when I'd had enough of thinking about it and decided to get some sleep, the sleep wouldn't come. I'd just about resigned myself to getting up early and starting up the next day when I heard a soft whisper in my ears. telling me to close my eyes. I slept well that night. When I was around 6, my family moved into a new house. My parents wanted us to be a part of the community, so they made sure we met all our neighbors. On one side was a girl of a few years older than me named Sally, and on the other was an old man named Mr. Johnson. I thought Mr. Johnson was pretty creepy at first. His skin was paper thin, and he would fall asleep on his front porch with his teeth in his lap. I didn't like Mr. Johnson at first, at least not until the day he gave me Daisy. "Mindy, over here, sweetie," Mr. Johnson called out to me. I approached him tentatively, afraid his teeth would fall out yet again. "Do you like dollies by any chance, Mindy?" he asked, giving me a gummy smile. "I love dollies, Mr. Johnson. They're my favorite toy," I said excitedly. As afraid as I was of Mr. Johnson, my love for dolls was far greater. "Well, then do I have a surprise for you. How would you like a new dolly? Well, she's not exactly brand new, but she'd be new to you," Mr. Johnson said as he slowly got up from his rocking chair. "She was my daughter's when she was your age. She's gone now, though, and I feel like her doll would like a new home." "I'd love to meet her, Mr. Johnson," I said, giving him a gap-toothed smile. I waited outside excitedly, and after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Johnson came back holding a large plastic doll. The doll was incredible. It had the same height as me and was made of hard plastic. Its clothes were old and faded, but still in good shape. "This here is Daisy," Mr. Johnson said as he handed me the doll. It was heavy, much heavier than any doll I'd ever held before. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'll make sure to take good care of her," I said cheerfully. "That you do, Mindy. That you do," Mr. Johnson said as he sat back down in his chair. I hurriedly took my new friend home to show her off to my parents. They seemed concerned that I had stolen the doll from Mr. Johnson, but he assured them that it was a gift. For the next few months, Daisy and me were inseparable. I would take her absolutely everywhere with me, and she would sleep with me in my bed. It was only inevitable that she would get damaged somehow, especially given how old she was. We were playing Tea Party when I accidentally knocked her off her chair and cracked the side of her head on the floor. I immediately burst into tears. I'd just hurt my favorite doll, my best friend. My mom came rushing in and saw the scene, and that's when she scooped me up in her arms, doing her best to comfort me. "Don't worry, little Mindy. Mommy's gonna make Daisy all better. I promise," I remember her telling me as she carried me around the house. Once I had finally calmed down, my mom and me took Daisy to the toy repair store downtown. They told us that it was a pretty severe crack, but they were going to do the best they could. It could take a few days though. A few days later, my mom received a call from the toy repair store. I couldn't hear what they were saying on their end, but they sounded furious at my mom. I remember her telling me that she had to run out real fast and take care of some stuff, but that she would be back in a jiffy. When she returned home, I was so excited to get Daisy back. I missed my best friend so much. Instead, my mom returned home empty-handed. "Where's Daisy, Mommy?" I asked her, confused. Tears began to well up in my mom's eyes. Daisy's not coming home anymore, sweetie. But come on, we can get you a new best friend," she said as she took my hand. "But I don't want a new best friend, Mommy. I want Daisy," I whined. "Daisy's gone forever, and never take anything from anyone without my permission again," my mom snapped at me as tears fell down her cheeks. I was scared and confused. Did I do something wrong? Was there something wrong with Daisy? I rode in the car with my mom silently until we got to our destination. My heart lit up with excitement, and that night, we brought home my new best friend, Max the Mutt. Max quickly replaced Daisy in my heart, and Daisy faded into what was only a memory until last week. I was cleaning out a box from my parents' attic when I came across a box full of family pictures. There, in the middle of one of the binders, was a picture of me sitting next to Daisy. The memories came flooding back. I brought the picture down and found my mom sitting in her living room. "Hey Mom, look what I found! An old picture of me and my dolly Daisy," I said with a smile as I gave her the picture. My mom began shaking. Tears welled up behind her eyes. "Is everything okay, Mom?" I asked her worriedly. "I was hoping you had forgotten about Daisy. I was hoping you'd never remember that sick joke that monster played on you," she said with a tremble in her voice. "What do you mean, Mom? Mr. Johnson?" "You're old enough now. You deserve to know the truth," she began. "Do you remember when you knocked Daisy down and cracked her head?" "Yeah, of course, and then a few days later is when we got Max, right?" I said. "Yes. The reason we got Max was because of what they found when they were repairing Daisy." You see, they weren't going to be able to patch her head up very easily, so they had to remove the broken pieces and replace the whole section. However, when they took the pieces away, they found something inside Daisy, my mom said with a glassy look in her eye. What do you mean they found something inside Daisy? I asked, unsure. My mom suddenly looked directly at me and grabbed my hand. I'm so sorry, Mindy. I should have looked at your doll before saying you could have it. I should have given it an inspection or something. I should have been a better mother, my mom pleaded with me. Mom, what did they find inside Daisy? Inside of your doll was the remains of Mr. Johnson's daughter. He had cut her throat and stuffed it in that plastic tomb years before keeping her young and perfect forever. And when he was done with her, he gave her to you as one final sick stunt. Daisy wasn't just the doll's name, it was his daughter's. If you're gonna judge me for meeting a stranger on Craigslist, I prefer you stop listening right now. I live with enough internal judgment as it is. I was 20, had a used 99 blue-green Toyota Corolla, social anxiety, and $19 in my bank account. It was the first semester of my junior year at college, and there were half a dozen get-togethers every weekend that I was running out of excuses to avoid. So I decided that babysitting would be the perfect way to spend my Friday nights. The thought of spending my weekend nights all alone, studying, while making $9 an hour soothed my nerves more than I could possibly say. Don't judge me. You don't know my life. So when I found Amy on Craigslist, everything seemed perfect. Chloe was 5, Ivan was in his terrible 2s, get it? And after a week of email and text exchanges, I felt like I really knew her. She was 33 years old, a stay-at-home mom who was itching to get back into the workforce. You're perfect, she had disclosed several times via text. Nothing seemed sketchy, and if you can't make a leap of faith at least once in a while, doesn't that make for a miserable and empty existence? I was the consummate professional. I had a pantsuit and everything. Yes, I was wearing Converse to a job interview, but it was kid-friendly, and I was ready to charm the heck out of those kids. I pulled the Corolla in front of the house at 7:30 p.m. for the 8 p.m. interview, then sat out and stared at the windshield for 20 minutes before walking in 10 minutes early, because you know, the anxiety. It was already dark by that time in the Minnesota October, and I slipped my way up the frozen cement walkway in an oversized parka and mittens. I rang the doorbell with my thumb and waited. As I watched, my breath rised up in plumes. I imaged all the bad things that could happen behind that door. I couldn't help it. I was relieved when it finally opened, and extremely tense when it wasn't Amy. Unless Amy had a baby-faced man-child with a creepy smile. He stared at me, pale-faced, for several awkward seconds. Then his eyes started to gravitate past my neck and toward my chest. I stated awkwardly. His eyes snapped back to mine, and he offered a delighted smile. Come on in. Amy. She's my aunt. And, she's back in with Chloe and Ivan. I watched the steam rise in front of me as I breathed a sigh of relief. He knew everyone's name. That meant he could be trusted, right? I walked into the house, past the staircase, and he snapped the door shut behind me. It was a pretty nice place, to be honest. He walked past me, deeper inside without offering to take my coat. I waited for a beat, then took it off. I looked around, and then I left it on the floor. I really didn't want to inconvenience anyone by asking where I should put it. I kept the mittens on because, well, my pantsuit had no pockets. Throttling quickly, I followed him into the kitchen. We went through and came out into a living room, where he sat down on a couch. He patted the cushions next to him. I froze in place at the thought of sitting next to a stranger. After an uncomfortable silence, I finally addressed the stranger, which I hate doing. So, will I be meeting the kids tonight? I paused. Because, I thought I'd be meeting the kids tonight. I was an eloquent speaker. Amy wants you to try an interview with me, he said in a voice that tried to be smooth but was just creaky. He licked his lips. I have to pee, I announced chipperly. Which way? The man-child looked genuinely confused. It's in the room with the toilet in it. This raised an alarm. One of the very uncomfortable things about social anxiety is knowing that there is sometimes legitimate anxiety that needs to be separated from the things that my friends see to placate me. Do you know that feeling you get when you're about to encounter an ex who you're totally over with but not really? For the first time in months, knowing that he'll show up with another woman? Combine that with looking over the edge of a 3-story roof while watching a kid faceplant on the concrete and knocking his front teeth out. That's the level of anxiety that consumes me when I can't control it. I couldn't control it in that moment. I tried to think of something to say, but just gave up and walked out of the living room. The bathroom is the sanctuary of the anxiety-stricken, so I darted my face all around the house in search of one. My eyes landed on a hallway lined with photos, so I headed in that direction hoping that it would lead me out of sight. I was walking through the hallway when I stopped. The photos on the wall were all of the same family. They didn't look much like the man-child at all. A couple who looked to be in their 60s was featured in every single one. They were probably 20 years past the childbearing age, with flecks of white in their hair. Both were thin and black, which stood in stark contrast to the round-faced, pale man-child in the living room. 3 children appeared in various photos, all of whom were in their late teens. I thought about the living room. There were no toys. Chloe is 5. I looked to the blank white fridge. There are no drawings stuck to its surface. Ivan is 2. There was no baby gate at the staircase.
You're perfect.
And that's when my anxiety went into overdrive. I would have had to go past the living room to exit through the front door. So instead, I turned and trotted down the hall. I thought I heard that man-child stand up, but I wasn't interested in sticking around long enough to find out if it was him or not. I emerged into a small room with tall vases on the floor that's kid-friendly, and realized I was at the end of the house. There was no back door. I tried to open the window, but it was locked. I fumbled with the hitch. I couldn't use my fingers with the mittens binding them, and I was unable to open it. My panicked mind told me, I don't have time to take off the mittens, while I definitely heard a man-child walking through the house, and I finally grasped the hitch and it slowly spun around until the window had unlocked, and I pushed until it finally opened with a whoosh of cold air. I climbed out into the frosty night, but my Converse caught something on the way out. I don't know if it was the sill or if it was a hand. I tumbled onto the ground, laying still for about half a second, and scrambled to my feet. This was the backyard. I was still far away from my car. I ran around the side of the house, trying to stay quiet. Instead, I knocked over a trash barrel and a cat screamed. As I began to move forward, the corolla began to emerge in distance, and I started running toward it. That was a mistake. The ground was icy. Who knew the tailbone could hurt so much when it hit the floor? I got up and walked briskly, my feet sliding every which way along the frozen concrete as I approached my car. My hands were rattling from cold, nerves, and pain. I tried to get my key through the lock, but it wouldn't go in. Tears streaming, I pinched the tip, aimed at the keyhole, and forced it in. I opened the door, threw myself in, started the car, and peeled away without waiting for the engine to warm up. 3 blocks away, I was ready to give myself permission to cry. The sensation of wrongness hit me, but it took a second to understand why my spatial orientation was off. There wasn't supposed to be a head in the back seat reflecting from the rear view mirror. I screamed and turned the car toward a tree. The crash wasn't that bad, but the airbags deployed. Given the speed I'd been going, it didn't hurt any worse than my tailbone did. I pushed open the car, dropped to the ground, and threw up. Once my gut was clear, I sprinted into the woods and hid in the shadow. After 5 minutes had passed, I was about ready to admit that I'd imagined the head in the mirror. I stood up and took 1 step forward when the rear driver's side door had opened. A shadow stepped out, slammed the door behind it, and walked down the road. 2 hours had passed before the fear of hypothermia finally coaxed me from the hiding spot. I left my parka in the house. I never told the police about the man in my car. Who would have believed me? Facing the inevitable skepticism was more than I could bear. I said that a cat had run out in front of me, and that I steered toward a tree in an attempt to avoid it. My anxiety had forced me to plan 10, yes 10, stories for the police if they asked too many of the wrong questions. In the end though, they simply decided that my car was safe to drive, flipped their notebook into a pocket, and left. I drove straight to my dorm room and stayed there until classes resumed on Monday. I used the Gatorade bottle as a restroom because I was afraid to open my door. My borderline anorexia stormed past its threshold, and I actually felt better skipping meals for 3 days. I told myself that it was better to keep it secret, that no one would believe me, that even if someone did, it wouldn't do any good, so there was no risk worth seeming crazier than I already was. It helped me sleep at night. At the end of October, a woman named Catherine also tried to meet Amy from Craigslist for a babysitting gig. Amy wasn't real, but Michael John Anderson was. He murdered Catherine when she arrived. He'd been planning it for some time. Michael will spend the rest of his time in jail, God willing. It's impossible to forgive myself for keeping my story a secret. The knowledge that I was so close to dying, and saving someone else in doing so, has set fire to every nerve in my body. I had to drop out of school. I was never able to drop back in either. That night shattered my life. Paranoia, fear, and guilt are as omnipresent as sound and light. In a way, I'll spend the rest of my life in jail too. My brother Luke and I were driving from Salt Lake City to Reno for the heck of it. He had just graduated from high school and I was home from college in Colorado. Our dad had given us a couple $100 and told us to go have fun. Here's the thing. Luke's a good kid, but has been deeply depressed ever since our mom passed away. He wanted to get out of town, see some stars, contemplate life, the universe, you know, everything in the wide expanse of the desert. And when he asked me to come along, I happily obliged. Luke was really into that outrun/vaporwave scene, so I suggested that we played like we were in the 80s for the ride out, and he enthusiastically agreed. I packed up our dad's old 1989 Jeep Wrangler, and Luke brought a bunch of paper maps and cassette tapes. We silenced our phones, high-fived, and took off a couple hours before the sun set down with the intention of driving through the night. We weren't afraid and figured it would be relatively safe. We thought leaving at night was a good idea. We thought we'd skip the heat and the other cars and the stress. That was our first mistake. We made it 2 hours into the desert with no problems, traveling down at a smooth 85 miles per hour. Luke seemed to be enjoying himself. The music was turned up and the windows were rolled down. Above us were the stars just starting to come out and the sun sank blood red into the west. We stopped for food at a little cafe in a town called West Wendover. We both got the poncho special and dug in, leaving about an hour later. By this time, it was starting to get dark. Real dark. And the Wrangler's brights barely lit up the deep shadow around us. Clouds had swept in, covering any light from the sky, making the desert seem claustrophobic and spooky. Luke joked that it was the perfect setting for a slasher flick. I laughed and told him to shut up. We stopped in Carlin for gas. The station we pulled into wasn't run down or sketchy or worrisome. In fact, it was lit by bright fluorescent lights and a few semi-trucks that were parked off to the side. Luke asked me if I thought they were in there with some hookers. I rolled my eyes and went inside to pay and use the restroom, asking him if he wanted anything. Snacks, coffee, things like that. He said no, and said he didn't have to use the restroom either, and decided to stay outside by the Wrangler. By the time I got back out, I knew something was wrong. Luke was quiet. He seemed spooked. "You okay?" I asked him, hopping up into the Wrangler. He simply shook his head. His eyes were watery, and I wondered if he had been crying. "You sure? We can turn back. It's okay to be sad, okay? I'm here for you. I'm always here for you. I won't get mad if you want to go back." That guy. What guy? I looked around us. The station was still empty, with the exception of a few trucks that were parked off to the side. He inhaled and then exhaled. "While you were in there, this guy came up to me and told me I'm gonna die tonight." "What the heck? Seriously? Where'd he go?" Luke shrugged. "Do you want to stay here for the night? Should I call the cops? Tell the gas dude?" Luke then shook his head. No. It's okay. They're probably just messing with me." "What do you look like?" Again, Luke just shrugged. "Normal. Maybe in his 30s or 40s. I don't know. Forget it." "Okay, well, did he have a car?" "No, he walked up, pounded on the window, said that, then walked away." "Where?" Luke gestured with his head towards the only entrance to the gas station. "That way. Turned right. East, I mean." "Well," I said. "Good thing we're going west. It'll be okay. Okay?" Luke nodded. "We can stop anytime and go back, okay?" He nodded again. "Alright, let's go. Should get there early in the morning. But we'll see the sunsets, so that's something, eh?" Luke didn't respond. I pulled out of the gas station, wary, but not too worried. People can be crazy, people can be jerks, they can be evil. And that was our second mistake. We drove that way for the next hour, in complete silence. The only time that Luke spoke was to ask if he could turn off the music. And that made the ride so much spookier. Just driving in silence through the bleak nothingness of the desert, without stars, without much light. I had asked Luke if he was okay a few times, and every time he just nodded. About an hour after leaving Carlin, Luke spoke up again. "I have to pee," he said. I glanced over at him, sighed reluctantly, and replied, "Yeah, me too. I drank a lot of coffee. Should we pull over?" Luke tried to hide the fear in his voice, but it was there. "I don't know. Is your phone working?" He checked it. "No service. Is yours?" "Nah." "Well, The map says there's a station like an hour-ish away. I can just hold it, I guess. I began. I looked in the rear view and around us. We were completely alone. No lights, no signs of civilization, just an open expanse of desert and a moody, dark sky. I think it'll be okay if we stopped. We should make it quick, though. Luke looked around too. He looked worried, but he said rather bravely, "Yeah, I think it'll be okay." This was our third mistake. And you know what they say, 3 strikes, you're out. I slowed the Wrangler to a stop, pulled over into the dirt, and killed the engine, leaving the keys in the ignition. I left the headlights and hazards on too, just in case. Being a woman, I wanted to get out farther in the field to do my thing. I didn't want Luke to see or hear me. I found a good spot across the road down a small hill and crouched down behind some shrubbery. Luke had gone off on the side of the road and we'd pulled off on, out of my eyesight. It happened so fast. I was doing my thing when I heard this weird, inhumane laughter, and then the engine of the Wrangler. I pulled my shorts back up and ran towards the road. I could see the headlights rapidly disappearing into the night, leaving me almost in pitch blackness. It drove maybe a little more than 50 feet, then jerked to a stop. I ran towards it screaming, "Luke, you jerk! What are you doing?" And then, whistling, coming from the left of me. It didn't sound like a bird call. 3 notes, high, low, and in between. I spun around, but I couldn't see through the darkness. I decided to ignore it and continue towards the Jeep. "Luke, this isn't funny!" The engine revved, and it burned rubber before taking off again. This time pulling to a sharp left, crossing the median, and disappearing into the desert. 1 second, it was there, and the next, both the headlights and the sound of the engine just poof, they vanished. And then I heard him. Luke was screaming, "Leia! Leia! Oh God!" His voice suddenly stopped. The silence was so loud it stung. I was crying by this point. Standing in the middle of the road staring at the direction the car had gone. There was another whistle, high, low, and in between. Then, another bark of inhuman demonic laughter. It sounded close. I stared into the darkness, tears blurring my vision, trying to see what had made it when I heard a rumbling sound from behind me. An engine. One single headlight was coming directly at me and I stood frozen like some dumb prey in the middle of the road. I wasn't thinking. I was scared. I thought I was gonna die. Whoever was following me was also yelling at me, telling me to either slow down or stop. I can't quite remember. The engine and the light both grew in intensity, until I realized that running was futile, and I turned around to face my pursuer. It was a man on a motorcycle. He was wearing all black. Helmet, gloves, pants, shirt, jacket, boots. He stopped a few yards from behind me, kicked the stand out, and killed the engine. He then swiftly pulled off his helmet and started walking towards me, leaving the one motorcycle headlight on. It lit up a circle of desert around us, and cast them in a deep shadow. A brighter, much smaller light flashed onto my face, and I realized he was holding up a flashlight. "Hey, you okay?" he said. I didn't respond, and he continued walking towards me. "Saw you running down the road. Didn't mean to scare you. Do you need any help? Are you okay? What are you doing out here alone? Your car break down? I didn't see anyone around. How long have you been out here?" He lowered the light from my face, and I saw him a little bit more clearly. He was middle-aged, wood-colored hair, trim. I took a few steps back and then said, "Please don't hurt me." A mix of emotions crossed my face. Shock, pity, sadness, and a dash of curiosity. He suddenly reached for something in his back pocket. I cringed backwards and whimpered a bit. He saw this and slowly removed his hand, then held them both up. A gesture that said, "I'm not dangerous." "Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you, okay? Just gonna reach into my pocket for my ID." I blinked at him. There wasn't much I could do to protect myself except run. Behind me, I heard the man mutter something like, "God dang it," before giving chase. I was fast, but he was faster, and I soon felt his hand close around my upper arm, and he spun me around to face him. He quickly grabbed my other arm too and clamped down, holding me in place. He was strong, but I was screaming bloody murder. He shook me a little and said, Hey, calm down, okay? I'm not here to hurt you. I'm a federal agent. I'm gonna show you my ID." He spoke calmly and slow. released one of my arms, and reached back again. I used this as an opportunity to punch him in the face as hard as I can with my free hand. The grip of his other hand didn't budge. Instead, he just flinched and said, "Ow," and held up something thin and rectangular. It was an ID. It said FBI in blue caps at the top of it. It had a photo of his face, unsmiling. Underneath it was his name with a string of numbers. It looked fake, and I was worried, so I stared at him straight in the eyes and said, "Do you have a badge?" He nodded. "Sure do. It's in my jacket pocket. Hurts to sit on." He gestured with his head back in the direction of the motorcycle. "If I release you, are you gonna take off?" I didn't respond. He sighed. "Okay. Just don't sock me again. Alright?" He inhaled deeply and then let me go. I didn't move, and he gave me a small smile, then exhaled, then slowly started reaching into his jacket pocket. It fluttered open for a moment, and I saw a gun strapped to his shoulder holster. He noticed that I noticed, but said nothing and didn't reach for it. Instead, he held his badge out for me to inspect. A semester ago, I learned how to recognize a fake badge from a real one. His was solid gold, with the words Federal Bureau of Investigation engraved on it, rather than just the acronym. Lady Justice, blind, holding up a scale and a torch, was embossed in the center. On either side of her were the letters U and S. At the bottom of the badge were the words Department of Justice, and at the very top was an eagle. It was indeed authentic, but the thing that made me believe him more than anything else was the fact that he didn't hand it over to me. No federal agent would ever hand their badge over. Just like that, I trusted him, and I started to scream cry about everything that happened that night. Hey, said the agent calmly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "No one's gonna hurt you while I'm here. Take a deep breath, okay? I'm willing to help. We'll figure this out. I'm gonna call for backup. And then we're gonna go back to the road and wait, okay? I'll shoot several holes into anyone who tries anything. I'm a pretty good shot." He flashed the light around us briefly, and I gotta give him credit. He didn't look the least bit scared, or if he was, he wasn't showing it. I appreciate that. He slid out a slim black phone from his jacket, called into the nearest city, gave his location, ID number, and name, then explained that he couldn't give escort back into town since he only had one helmet. Nevada law requires all motorcycle riders to wear helmets. He hung up, turned to me, and said, "Come on, let's go. You can tell me everything. They're on the way. It's going to be okay." He handed me the flashlight, kicked up his stand, and started pushing his bike back towards the road, while I followed close behind. As we walked, I talked. As soon as we got back to the road, he pulled out some flares out of his bike saddlebags and set them up a few feet behind us, giving the area a sinister red glow. He hadn't said a word while I spoke, just listened and nodded and looked around, wary. "What were you doing in the desert alone?" I suddenly asked, unable to stop myself. The agent glanced at me and then looked back out into the desert. "Investigating." "Investigating what?" The agent sighed. "Look, whatever happened to your brother, we'll find him. I know I can't say much to make any of this better or easier, but I'm going to do my hardest to figure out what's going on. We'll find him." I sniffled and said nothing. Then he glanced at me again. "Tell me about Luke. What's his favorite food? Band? Book?" So I told him, and soon flashlights appeared on the horizon, framed by the first light of the rising sun. I was given an escort back into town inside a police car, where I gave my first statement and called my dad. The agent who found me decided to stay back and search around. He told the cops he wouldn't need backup, but if they didn't hear from him by the end of the day, to send another patrol out. Back in town, the cops I spoke to thought my brother just ran away, dismissing and belittling his depression, saying that he probably just wanted some attention and took the car for a joyride. But the worst thing was they laughed, like they thought depression was some big joke. The agent returned a few hours later with a car instead of a motorcycle and offered to drive me to the airport. I accepted. He was really the only person I trusted here, the only person I felt who believed me. I told him what happened, what the cops had said. He sighed and shook his head. He glanced at me sharply and continued, "Despite the situation, despite everything that happened," I smiled and he threw a roguish grin. I noticed he was developing a bruise from where I had punched him before. After a few minutes, he spoke up again. "For what it's worth, I believe you. Everything you said. About the guy who threatened your brother, about the laughter and the whistling. about your brother's depression, all of it. I'm on your side. I'll do everything within my power to find Luke. I thanked him and then added, sorry about that, for punching you. He shrugged it off and then said, hey, no sweat. You got one heck of a left hook. You should be proud. Before he left, he gave me his card. It was matte black with glossy black writing on it. He said the number on it was his own personal one and that I could call him anytime, even if I just want to talk. He told me to leave a message if he didn't answer, and that he'd get back to me as soon as he possibly could. My dad and I still have hope Luke is out there somewhere, that he's still alive. I'm still in contact with the FBI agent, but nothing's come of it yet. Happy Halloween, you guys.